Muslims repeatedly saved Jews from extinction. Here's the story. Without the arrival of Islam, Jews were threatened with extinction in Rome and Persia. The relationship between Muslims and Jews has recently been at its lowest point following the genocide launched by the Zionist entity Israel in the Gaza Strip. The massacre carried out by the Jewish state is even more painful when you consider that Islam has repeatedly played a significant role in saving the group from total annihilation. This is an unpopular and unpleasant claim in the modern world. But it is the truth of history, wrote David Wasserstein. The argument is twofold. First, in 570 AD, when the Prophet Muhammad was born, the Jews in Judaism were heading for extinction. And second, the arrival of Islam saved them. Islam provided a new context in which they not only survived but also thrived, laying the foundation for the subsequent prosperity of Jewish culture through the medieval period to the modern world. In the 7th century AD, for example, according to the Armenian historian Cebios, the Jews were nearly exterminated by the Byzantines led by Emperor Heraclius. At that time, the Jews who had been oppressed by the Romans for hundreds of years allied with the Sasanian dynasty from Persia. In 614, they succeeded in occupying Jerusalem and then slaughtered tens of thousands of Christians in the city of that region. Jerusalem was then handed over by Persia to the Jewish leaders. However, the Jews were not satisfied because they felt they were promised control over the entire region that included Palestine and parts of present-day Lebanon and Syria. This made Persia fight the Jews in Jerusalem. In 622, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius succeeded in retaking Jerusalem. Remembering what the Jews had done to the Christian population before, Heraclius carried out a massacre of the Jews. They were also expelled from Jerusalem and were not allowed to live within a 3-kilometer radius of the Holy City. Not only that, in the 630s, Heraclius issued a decree forcing all Jews living in the Byzantine region to convert to Christianity. The order was carried out in stages from Jerusalem to Africa. Jewish children were also taken by force because Heraclius was worried that their parents were only pretending to be Christians. The policy continued to spread to North Africa and Iberia as well as the current region of Turkey, which had a significant Jewish community. Under such pressure, the savior of the Jewish people came from the east. At that time, the Muslim troops led by the friend of the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Ubaidah, brought troops to conquer Jerusalem. Seeing the opportunity, Cebios said that all the Jewish tribes who were descendants of Isaac joined the Ishmaelite tribes from Arabia. At that time they were fighting to claim the Holy Land in Palestine as descendants of Abraham. God gave this land as an inheritance for Abraham and his sons after him. Your inheritance is the desert. So go in peace to your country, said the troops to the Roman troops, quoted by Cebios. These troops then succeeded in besieging and finally occupying Jerusalem. Caliph Umar bin Khattab, who came from Medina to receive the keys to the city of Jerusalem, cancelled all of Heraclius' orders, allowed the Jews to return to live in Jerusalem and guaranteed their religious freedom in the status of dhimmis. The next threat of Jewish extinction occurred around the same time in the Iberian Peninsula, the region that now includes Portugal and Spain. During the period of Arian Visigothic rule, Jews in Spain were relatively free to practice their faith. However, when the Visigoths converted to Catholicism, especially under King Reccared, 586 to 601, anti-Jewish policies intensified. King Sisebut, for example, ordered the forced baptism of Jews in 614. According to the Jewish history page, he was considered a fanatic more than the priests. This king was a terror to the Jews of Spain. He decreed in 614 that any Jew who refused to baptize himself or his children and servants for more than a year should be punished with 100 strokes, banished from the country and confiscated of his property. Sisebut went even further. Through murder, torture, and horrific cruelty, he forced 90,000 people to be baptized. Those who were stubborn were persecuted in the most cruel manner, and their property was confiscated and were not allowed to leave the kingdom until they converted to Christianity. This policy continued at different levels by various Visigothic rulers. Visigothic law included punishments for Jews who broke the law, such as confiscation of property and slavery. Some kings went so far as to force Jews to choose between baptism and exile. By the 8th century, Jewish children were also confiscated by the state so that they would not return to their old religion. King Sisebut, for example, ordered the forced baptism of Jews in 614. According to the Jewish history page, he was considered a fanatic more than the priests. This king was a terror to the Jews of Spain. He decreed in 614 that any Jew who refused to baptize himself or his children and servants for more than a year should be punished with 100 strokes, banished from his country and confiscated of his property. Sisebut went even further. Through murder, torture, and horrific cruelty, he forced 90,000 people to be baptized. Those who were stubborn were persecuted in the most cruel way, and their property was confiscated and were not allowed to leave the kingdom until they converted to Christianity. This policy continued at different levels by various Visigothic rulers. Visigothic law included punishments for Jews who broke the law, such as confiscation of property and slavery. Some kings went so far as to force Jews to choose between baptism or exile. By the 8th century, Jewish children were also confiscated by the state so that they would not return to their old religion. During the time of King Roderick, precisely in 710, the savior of the Jewish people came from the south. At that time, the Muslim commander Tariq bin Ziyad mobilized his troops to conquer Iberia. Having suffered for a long time under the control of the Visigoths, the Jews flocked to join the Muslim forces. They then succeeded in ending the rule of the Visigoths. Not only did they survive extinction, Jews under the Andalusian Muslims grew and developed materially and intellectually. The Jewish people to this day still remember those times in Andalusia as their golden age. The next rescue carried out by Muslims against Jews was at the peak of the extermination launched by Nazi Germany. In German-occupied France, according to the Washington Post, see Kadur Benghabrat, the rector of the Grand Mosque of Paris, according to various sources, helped 100 to 500 Jews disguised as Muslims to escape the Nazis. The New York Times reported that despite the famine in Iran in 1942-43, the country became a refuge for 116,000 Polish refugees, about 5,000 of whom were Jews. Iranian society openly welcomed them and provided them with assistance. The surviving children who arrived in Iran became known as the Children of Tehran. Polish schools, cultural and educational organizations, shops, bakeries, businesses, and press were established to make Poles feel more at home. The Iranian city of Isfahan was once called the City of Polish Children because of the thousands of Polish orphans who settled there. Meanwhile, Mohammed V, the King of Morocco during World War II, refused to accept the Vichy French regime's demands to sign anti-Jewish laws. He also refused to deport 250,000 Jews from the country, sparing them death in Nazi concentration camps and extermination camps in Europe. The Sultan's stance was based on the contempt that the Vichy dictat had for his sovereign claim over all his people, including the Jews, and on his humanitarian instincts. Albania, a predominantly Muslim country, saved almost all of its Jewish population. The survival rate in the then Yugoslav province of Kosovo was 60%, making it one of the highest in Europe. Most of Albania's 2,000 Jews were sheltered by Muslim residents. Meanwhile, Selahattin al-Cuman, the Turkish consul general on the island of Rhodes, refused to hand over dozens of Jews to Nazi Germany in 1944, saving their lives. Thousands of Jews were also saved by Muslims in North Africa, defying the French colonial powers at the time.